Welcome to Hollywood Latest Reports. When two women of faith meet, after walking through the darkest valleys of life, something powerful happens. Not through words, but through shared silence, strength, and the unspoken bond of loss. That's exactly what happened when Frances Swaggart and Wendy Nelson crossed paths after the passing of Russell M. Nelson, the respected leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Both women, icons of faith in their own right, carried a quiet kind of strength. They were no strangers to grief, yet their hearts radiated peace. Behind the closed doors of that emotional meeting, two stories of love, loss, and resilience intertwined, in a way that deeply touched everyone who knew them. The moment that brought them together. It was shortly after Russell M. Nelson's funeral, a moment heavy with reflection and reverence, when Frances Swaggart reached out privately to Wendy Nelson. According to sources close to both families, Frances expressed her desire to offer comfort not as a public figure, but as a woman who truly understood what it meant to lose a lifelong companion. Frances, the longtime wife of evangelist Jimmy Swaggart, had spent decades standing beside her husband through fame, controversy, and faith. Though Jimmy's passing had deeply affected her, Frances had learned to draw her strength from God and from the understanding that love never truly dies. It simply transforms. When she heard of Russell Nelson's death, she felt a pull, not of curiosity, but of compassion. Wendy Nelson, a strong yet gentle woman of wisdom and grace, had been Russell's partner in faith and service for nearly 2 decades. The idea that she would now walk this path alone resonated deeply with Frances. A private conversation filled with peace. When the two finally met, away from cameras and public attention, witnesses described it as quiet, sincere, and powerful. There were no grand speeches, no heavy tears, only the peaceful exchange between two hearts that had both been tested by loss. Frances spoke gently about finding peace in the promises of eternity. Wendy listened, her eyes full of emotion, her voice soft yet confident. She spoke of Russell's unwavering faith, his kindness, and how even in his final days he prayed for others more than himself. Faith doesn't erase pain, Frances reportedly said, but it teaches us how to walk through it without losing who we are. In that moment, Wendy reached over and held Frances's hand. Two widows, from different ministries, different denominations, yet bound by the same spirit of love and hope. The strength of two women of faith. Both Frances and Wendy had spent their lives supporting great men of God, standing quietly yet firmly behind them through decades of ministry, trials, and triumphs. Frances Swaggart, known as the backbone of the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, was never just a preacher's wife. She was a leader in her own right, managing responsibilities, praying with women around the world, and serving as a source of balance and wisdom within her family and church. Wendy Nelson, a former professor and author before marrying President Russell Nelson, brought intellect, poise, and deep spiritual understanding to her role as First Lady of the Church. Her writings on faith and personal revelation had touched many even before she became a public figure. When both of their husbands passed away, the world saw grief, but what heaven saw was strength, faith beyond loss. After their meeting, those close to Frances and Wendy said they both described feeling unexpected peace. Frances, known for her calm and composed demeanor, later shared in a private devotional that, when one heart breaks, another understands. Though she didn't mention Wendy by name, her words hinted at that sacred conversation. Wendy, too, was seen attending a small women's gathering weeks later, where she shared a profound reflection. Sometimes God allows us to meet someone who reminds us that faith still works, even after the hardest goodbye. These weren't just comforting words, they were living proof that faith has no denomination, no boundary. Pain connects people in ways sermons cannot. What the world saw and what they didn't. News of their quiet meeting spread through faith communities, sparking admiration and reflection. Many saw it as a beautiful moment. Two women from entirely different Christian worlds finding unity in shared sorrow and faith. But what most people didn't see were the subtle lessons their meeting carried. Grace and grief, both women showed that strength doesn't mean you don't cry. It means you keep standing even when you do. Faith beyond titles. They weren't there as Mrs. Swaggart or Sister Nelson. They were simply Frances and Wendy, two daughters of God comforting each other. Unity in spirit. Their meeting symbolized that true faith connects believers across churches, continents, and doctrines. It was a reminder that humanity, at its core, is about compassion. A new chapter for both. In the months following Russell Nelson's death, Wendy quietly stepped back from public speaking. She focused on prayer, writing, and personal reflection. Friends say she's found solace in continuing the legacy her husband built, not through grand gestures, but through quiet service. Frances, meanwhile, has continued to appear occasionally at the family worship center, radiating peace and resilience. Her faith seems deeper, her words softer, her gratitude stronger. Those close to her say she often mentions how meeting someone who truly understands changed her healing journey. The world may see them as figures from separate faiths, one Pentecostal, one Latter-day Saint, but heaven surely saw something else. Two hearts carrying the same divine strength, when faith becomes friendship. Perhaps the most touching part of this story is what developed afterward. A quiet friendship built on mutual respect. Frances and Wendy reportedly stayed in touch through letters and calls, often sharing scriptures and small words of encouragement. It wasn't a friendship for publicity, it was real, born in the ashes of loss, blooming in the soil of faith. One family friend shared, "When Wendy talks about Frances, her eyes light up. She says God sent her a friend who understands without explanation. And Frances? She simply says, God connects hearts that have walked through the same fire. Lessons the world can learn." Their meeting became more than just a private comfort. It became a silent testimony. The lesson? Strength doesn't mean walking alone. Even those who lead others in faith need someone to lean on. In a world where people are divided by beliefs, Frances and Wendy reminded everyone that compassion is the true language of heaven. Their story became a gentle whisper of unity, showing that faith, love, and empathy go far beyond church walls. A shared legacy of grace. Today, both women continue to honor their late husbands not with sorrow, but with gratitude. They live proof that love can outlast death and that true believers never really walk alone. Frances Swaggart often quotes her favorite verse, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." Wendy, in turn, shares Russell's words, "Faith in Christ makes our burdens light, not because they're smaller, but because we become stronger." Together, their lives tell one powerful truth: grief doesn't end your story, it deepens. Weeks turned into months, and while the world slowly moved on from the headlines of Russell M. Nelson's passing, Frances Swaggart and Wendy Nelson quietly continued their connection. One message, one prayer, one shared scripture at a time. It wasn't friendship for attention or appearance. It was simply two hearts recognizing each other's pain and choosing to walk together through it. Wendy found comfort in Frances's maturity, a woman who had walked through both public and private storms, and yet never let bitterness take root in her soul. Frances, on the other hand, admired Wendy's grace, her calm, intellectual faith, and her gentle strength, even when her eyes spoke of sleepless nights. According to those close to Frances, she once said softly, "It's rare to meet someone who understands silence the same way you do." That silence, the kind that follows after loss, had become a place of understanding between them. They didn't always speak of grief. Sometimes they talked about hope, about heaven, about continuing the mission their husbands had started. Letters of faith. Their friendship soon turned into what many described as a spiritual correspondence. Frances would send handwritten notes with verses that had helped her during her darkest days. Wendy replied with reflections from Russell's old sermons or her own journal entries, soft words that breathed peace. One of Wendy's letters reportedly read, "Frances, every sunrise now feels like a message from heaven. Russell's work isn't done, it just continues through faith. I feel him near every time I help someone else heal." Frances replied with a note that touched many hearts when later shared in a devotional. "Loss doesn't end our ministry. It reshapes it, makes it more tender, more real, and far more powerful than before." Those exchanges became the foundation of a sisterhood that neither of them expected, but both deeply needed. Two women, one purpose. Months later, both women were seen attending different Christian women's conferences, not as preachers, but as quiet listeners. People who saw them described a glow of renewed peace. Frances appeared more open, smiling again with that familiar kindness. Wendy, though still reserved, carried an unshakable calm, the kind only faith can build after heartbreak. In one meeting, Frances was asked how she found strength again. Her answer reflected both her own journey and Wendy's. God sometimes brings people into our lives not to remove our pain, but to remind us that we're not walking alone in it. That simple truth summarized everything their connection had become, a divine reminder that healing is never a solo process. faith that connects beyond denomination. What made their story truly beautiful was that it wasn't bound by church walls or religious differences. A Pentecostal and a Latter-day Saint, two very different traditions, found the same God in the same grief. Their friendship became living proof that faith speaks one language, love. And maybe, in the quiet of heaven, Jimmy Swaggart and Russell Nelson are smiling, knowing their wives didn't let sorrow break them, but turned their pain into purpose. When Francis Swaggart met Wendy Nelson, it wasn't just two widows meeting, it was two worlds touching. Pentecostal and Latter-day Saint, different yet deeply the same. Warapri, it was faith comforting faith, grace recognizing grace. Abraki and love, the kind that never dies, reminding us that heaven heals what time cannot. In a quiet room, two women held hands and proved what sermons have been trying to say for centuries. As time passed, Francis Swaggart and Wendy Nelson began to see their shared loss as a calling rather than a wound. Instead of allowing grief to define them, they used it to lift others. Quietly, they started reaching out to widows and women of faith who were struggling with similar heartache. Not through grand platforms, but through heartfelt letters, prayers, and one-on-one conversations. Wendy once said during a private gathering, "Pain shared with faith becomes ministry." Francis agreed, often reminding others that healing is not about forgetting, it's about remembering with peace. Their compassion began to ripple through their communities. Women who once felt alone found strength in their stories. Francis inspired through her gentle resilience, and Wendy guided through her deep understanding of faith and eternity. Together, they turned grief into grace, showing the world that when two hearts meet through faith, even sorrow can bloom into purpose. Their journey became a living testimony that love never truly ends, it simply changes form and continues its work, through kindness, through prayer, and through the quiet strength of two women who chose hope over heartbreak. This moment will be remembered for years to come. If you were moved, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this report with your friends. More exclusive stories and emotional updates are on the way, so stay